So for today, we had three authors. We had John Winthrop, we had Anne Bradstreet, and we had John Smith. Um, these three writers are definitely the earliest, some of the earliest Europeans in the Americas, and they're being read by people mostly not in America. They're mostly being read by people in Europe. And let's talk about John Smith first. So, okay, so John Smith. So, first of all, we've got really almost like a larger. It really is a larger than life type of story that we get about John Smith. I mean, we find this guy. If you read his bio, I mean, he was a veteran of multiple wars. He had adventured all over the world. Uh, he had scandalous affairs and all kinds of crazy stuff all over the world. I mean, we're talking in a day, before the internal combustion engine and mass transit. We have this guy who is really, I mean, he's a real jet setter, if you will. And by the age of just 26 years old, he finds himself going to the New World, and the Virginia Company of London is organizing this expedition, so he's going to be leading that. He had a lot of crazy times in the Americas, and we get to read about it in one of his books, From What Happened Till the First Supply. So John Smith had a lot of trouble getting people to work. And I don't know if you guys watched the video that I gave you to watch in the week 2 folder, but it kind of talks. They talk about how originally the thought was that there would be gold, and the English would be able to find gold in them there hills. And they looked at the Spanish, and the Spanish had already found a ton of gold out there, and it just turned out that there was no gold in the Appalachians or in the east coast of what we would consider, the New England area of the United States. So we have a lot of goldsmiths and jewelers who really have no other skill set. And as John Smith himself said, they would rather starve than farm. So we had an enormous amount of starvation, enormous amount of just really a lot of death due to a lot of part mismanagement, other parts just in some cases people just didn't want to work the work that needed to be done. They felt it was below them to have to do farming and this sort of the menial subsistence type of work that that was required. I guess in those days they would be considered essential workers, but they didn't want to go down and actually have to get dirty with the rest of them. So a lot of them just starved to death. And we have in some cases, just a 20% survival rate of colonists. So, I mean, if you had only I guess a 1 in 5 chance of surviving colonization, would you do that? So we had a lot of interesting the origins of the United States. We have a lot of countries who were trying to get rich. They were trying to make a lot of money, and so this in all of this we find John Smith, and he in what we read, he has kind of a grand adventure. Now, there's a few things you need to know about John Smith as far as like for the finals and for the midterms and whatnot. And one of the biggest things that we have about John Smith is that he wasn't necessarily the greatest writer in the world. Some of the prose are kind of hard to understand, of course, by our standards today, but they weren't considered like, the most beautiful lines in the world. But they were from a person who was seeing the New World and who was writing back home. So they were very popular in Europe at the time. We have the it's interesting that you'll see John Smith write about himself in the third person. So he's writing about his own adventures, right? So if you read this this story, he's writing about his own adventures, but he puts himself in the story as John Smith and not I. So it's not like this first person sort of a memoir that you would expect. What you're actually getting is he's turned it into a third person, which I mean is fine. You can do that, but it's interesting how he makes himself out to be. I mean, if and just think about this. If you're the only one, right, that knows how to read and write, and you're writing this stuff and you're sending it back to Europe, it's not like you're going to make yourself look bad. It's like posting a shot of yourself is like you look terrible on Instagram or something like that. You're not going to do that. So he definitely puts himself in the best of light. Always very courageous. I'm sure you noticed that, always, you don't see him making a lot of dumb mistakes, in other words. So one of the things, of course, the biggest reason why we read this particular section, obviously we see one of the very first interactions with the Native Americans. We see a lot of description, a lot of description that's colored by what we would consider maybe he's calling them devils and things like that, because of course he was very afraid, and in many of these cases these were hostile encounters with Native Americans. There you see a lot of this kind of like it's a lot of description, because people back home are like, okay, what is it like over there? And what are the people like? And tell us more about it. And of course, if it's hard for us to understand just how this experience was during this time in history where there was a new world. And, I a lot of times would compare it to if for some reason we were to go to Mars and we were to find people there, we would be like, okay, take as many pictures as you can, videotape everything, tell me everything, because I need to know about all this stuff. It was similar I guess in a way, as if they had gone to Mars and they found a whole new country with new people and new everything. And so this sort of the description that you see a lot here was specifically because he knew his readers, they were going to have questions. So you see this particular he's having there's a lot of description as far as the land, a lot of description as far as the what they call the king, and you see this whole struggle, and then you eventually see near the end, which is the part that in modern American culture we still remember John Smith to this day, because of course Disney brought out the Pocahontas movie, and we romanticized this, and then of course it was romanticized during the time as well. But if you go to page 119, you see kind of like the beginning of this series of events, and it says, at last they brought him to where, and I'm not going to try to pronounce. Well, maybe I will. I'll try to pronounce it. Wero Wokomo. I don't know. It's a difficult one to pronounce. But basically it's Powhatan's village. Okay, so there's Chief Powhatan, and he calls him their emperor. So he uses a lot of words that in the West, right, in the Europeans, that it would be very, something that the Europeans would say, oh, okay, I know what an emperor is. Okay, I get that. Well, he describes the things going on. He describes the people. And then on page 120, you get the paragraph where we get the movie, where we get all this imagery from. And it's about Pocahontas. At the entrance before the king, all the people gave a great shout. The queen of Appomattox was appointed to bring him water to wash his hands, and another brought him a bunch of feathers instead of a towel to dry them. Okay, so it's like, oh wow, look, they use feathers everything is new and strange and exotic, and everything that he's describing this for a reason, and especially for the impact that it's going to have on his readers back home. Let's see here. Having feasted him after their best barbarous manner they could, a long consultation was held, but the conclusion was 2 great stones were brought before Powhatan, when as many as could laid hands on him, dragged him to them, and thereon laid his head, and being ready with their clubs to beat out his brains, Pocahontas, the king's dearest daughter, when no entreaty could prevail, got on his head in her arms, and laid her own upon him to save him from death. Whereat the emperor was contented he should live to make him hatchets and her bells and beads and copper, for they thought him as well as all occupations as themselves. For the king himself will make his own robes, shoes, bows, arrows, pots, plant, hunt, or do anything else so well as the rest. So you get that scene that we've all, grown up with. And of course, he's the person writing this, right? And we always have to think about when we read something, whether it's modern day or whether it is, any time that a human being is writing something and it's like, hey, I was there and this happened and this is how it happened. We don't really know if this is exactly accurate. We just know that this is how he wrote it and this is what he told us. And judging from how he portrays himself in most of what he writes, it seems that he portrays himself in the best light. It is a really cool story, right? It's something that it's really just a paragraph here. I mean, yes, they use the rest in the movies as well, but really the concept of this little girl who puts her head down to save John Smith, that it's just this little section, and it's really captured the imagination, and it captured the imaginations of the Europeans who read this as well. So when it comes to John Smith, I hope you enjoyed his writing. I don't always find it incredibly enjoyable, his particular style of prose, but you have to admit that for a time whenever Europeans had no way of knowing what was going on in the Americas, they were reading this, and it was incredibly entertaining. It was full of action. It was full of descriptions of people that were incredibly foreign to what the Europeans were used to dealing with. And so people just really ate this up. They really, it was incredibly popular. And so basically that's what we have with John Smith. Just an incredible story, and you've got, possibly a storyteller who was very much interested in portraying himself in a very positive way. So if you didn't get a chance to read this, please go ahead and take some time to read it. I don't have time to go over in great depth, but it's one of the greatest reasons why we read it is specifically because this is one of the earliest of the English accounts of the New World. So, having said that, speaking of English accounts of the New World, you were also assigned to read, John Winthrop. So, John Winthrop, A Model of Christian Charity. So, we had many different groups going to the Americas, some for money. Most of the very first ventures out as far as colonization goes, when it comes to the Americas, were to turn a profit, really, to find resources, to find, something that would bring some kind of a profit back to the home country. Now, you had other groups, and you had like the Puritans, for instance. The Puritans were very, very Protestant in a time of great church reformation. And so the Church of England had already become what we consider Protestant. So whenever we say Protestant, that's essentially when you're considered a church that has separated from the Roman Catholic Church. So it's in Western Europe, and in the Americas, it's commonly just, if you're not a Catholic and you're Christian, then that is typically, we might say, you're Protestant. So it started with the Reformation, with Martin Luther in Germany, and then we had translations of the Bible into the common tongue. And then from there were tons of different denominations that sprung up. One of them were the Puritans, and they felt that the Church of England was still way too Catholic-y. They even though the Church of England had broken off from the Roman Catholic Church, it was pretty much, at least for the Puritans, it was way too close to what the Roman Catholic Church was like. It still had, it didn't have a pope, but it still had the more of a hierarchy of bishops and leaders who would kind of get top-down direction to the congregants as far as, this is what we believe, this is how we practice our faith. And so the Puritans, they considered themselves Congregationalists. So they believed that it should be from the congregation, that's where we should decide how we're going to worship. And they didn't like that the Church of England, they used incense and they wore the big hats, and they essentially did a lot of things that they felt were still, they knelt while receiving communion, I believe it was. There was a few of these things that they felt was way too Catholic-y, and they just were like, no, this is not good. And so they weren't very well liked in England, and they didn't like the Church of England. So when they got the opportunity to colonize, so we have John Winthrop. He gave a sermon, and this is the sermon, so a model of Christian charity. And we're not sure if he gave this sermon before they left or when they arrived, or not exactly sure when he gave the sermon, but the purpose of the sermon is pretty clear. We want to, and so it's important to understand kind of like the basics of why he gave this sermon. Now, one of the reasons why we remember this sermon is because, specifically because of it's the second to last paragraph, and we'll cover that in just a minute. But essentially, he was trying to get this colony to work. Okay, he was trying to get this colony to actually succeed. So many other colonies had failed, and so he was in charge of this colony. There's going to be a lot of colonists, and he needed to pull these people together. And so a few things that he talked about, kind of the biggest messages you're going to find in a model of Christian charity, is one, first of all, he's wanting to kind of talk about the fact that, there's the haves and there's the have-nots, and this is kind of the natural order of things. He wanted to make sure that people were good to each other, and that no one dominated another person. A lot of the things you would want, of course, if you're going off and you're colonizing. One of the biggest things that he wanted to make sure that his colonists would do is work for the greater good. So rather than working for your individual needs, you should be thinking about the needs of the group, of the colony. And that was one of the biggest things that he wanted to touch on in his sermon. So the fact that we're all interdependent, we're all in this together, and to use the words that are so commonly used in the year 2020, that everyone's actions affect each other. And of course, he does this as a preacher would do. He uses an enormous amount of scripture from the Bible, and he overcomes objections. He then leads to what is probably the most quoted, and which was actually used later on by I believe it was Ronald Reagan used this same imagery, but he used the imagery of a city on a hill. So we are an example to the world. We are, people are watching. essentially, and they're going to see what we can do, and we are an example to them. I'll read you just the this paragraph where he gives this reference. It's on page 188 in your textbook. Now, the only way to avoid this shipwreck, okay, because he was talking about some problems that can happen, and to provide for our posterity, is to follow the counsel of Micah, to do justly, to love mercy, to walk humbly with our God. For this end, we must knit together in this work as one man. So we're working all as one. We must entertain each other with brotherly affection. We must be willing to abridge ourselves of our superfluities for the supply of others' necessities. So, what he said, when we're abridging ourselves of something that is superfluous, we're basically saying, if there's something that you don't really need and you see someone else that has a need, you help that person. We must uphold a familiar commerce together in all meekness, gentleness, patience, and liberality. We must delight in each other, make others' conditions our own, rejoice together, mourn together, labor and suffer together, always having before our eyes our commission and community in the work, our community as members of the same body. So shall we keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. The Lord will be our God, and delight to dwell among us as his own people, and will command a blessing upon all our ways, so that we shall see much more of his wisdom, power, goodness, and truth than formerly we have been acquainted with. We shall find that the God of Israel is among us, when 10 of us shall be able to resist 1,000 of our enemies, when he shall make us praise and glory, that men shall say of succeeding plantations, the Lord make it like that of New England. So people will be jealous of us. People are going to try to do this same thing that we're trying to do. For we must consider that we shall be as a city upon a hill. The eyes of all people are upon us, so that if we shall deal falsely with our God in this work we have undertaken, and so cause him to withdraw his presence, help from us, we shall be made a story and a byword through the world. We shall open the mouths of enemies and speak evil of the ways of God, and all professors for sake of God's sake. We shall shame the faces of God's worthy servants, and cause their prayers to be turned unto curses upon us, until we consumed out of the good land, whether we are a-going. So, I mean, he's doing a little doom and gloom, right? What we might consider the hell and brimstone. If we don't do this, right? If we don't work together, if we don't put the common good above our individual good, there's going to be hell to pay. Okay, so he wants, and hey, I mean, it's a sermon, right? And so he says, hey, we have this greatness that we can achieve to. We can be excellent. We can really be something special as long as we work together, as long as we don't get jealous of each other, as long as we don't start fighting amongst each other. He's trying to really rally the troops together, if you will. But if we don't work together, it's going to be hell on earth. And of course, I mean, there's so many examples of colonies that failed. So he's got a lot to kind of be afraid of. So essentially, this is the sermon that we remember John Winthrop for, A Model of Christian Charity. There's some other readings in the book, but I'm not going to have you read those. But essentially, that city on a hill. So, of course, later on, it was used, that same, Ronald Reagan echoed it. If you take a look in your Bible, or not, it feels like the Bible, right? We got a lot of scripture here. If you take a look in your book, you can see after where it says city on a hill, upon a hill, you can see where there is actually a biblical reference that he's making on 3. Ye are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hid. Neither do men light a candle and put it under a bushel, but on a candlestick, and it giveth light unto all that are in the house. Matthew 5:14 and 15. So what we have here, so far, we've talked about 2 settling groups, right? We have John Smith and his group. They were primarily concerned with turning a profit. And then we have the religious settlers. Absolutely, they were very much trying to make a religious, I guess, exodus from the place where they considered the Church of England, which was just way too Roman Catholic for them, and they founded their own place. They were very strict. They were very strict amongst themselves as far as their rules, and they were very strict as far as their piety, and you had to follow the rules. And hence the reason why we would call someone today who is, I guess, being strict about following rules, we might call that person puritanical, as a reference to that. So, okay, just moving through. I don't want to take too long on these. I know last time, of course, we only have 3 people here, but last time I went way too long. So maybe that's why we only have 3 people here today. So I apologize. I'm going to not keep you late today. My goal is to get you out early today. So lastly, we have Anne Bradstreet, who happened to be the very first American author ever to be published in England or in Europe. So the others were not considered, they weren't American citizens, or basically Anne Bradstreet takes the prize for that. So we have her poetry, and this is during a time whenever poetry was really popular. People read it all the time for amusement. And we have the flesh and the spirit. And so, of course, we see a lot of religious imagery. We see essentially a description of 2 sisters that are having an argument, right? And so the argument is about the flesh and the spirit. And the spirit says, or the flesh speaks to the spirit in a way that says, how do you make it really? How do you sustain this life as a spirit? Don't you want something that's real, something that is in the physical realm, something that's actually real? And the spirit comes back and kind of in it, what we might consider Aristotelian. Can you hear that? That's my dog. Is there anybody here?
Yes, I'm here.
All right, good. I'm glad. Sometimes I feel like I'm talking to myself here. So all right, thank you, Devin. All right, you, Kinsey, Felipe, are you here? Just say
I'm
yeah.
here.
All right, cool. All right. I'm not all by myself with my dog.
I'm here too.
Okay, great. All right. I'm trying not to bore you. We'll try to get through this. However, if you have any comments, I would love to hear them. Actually, I'll get through this and then we can have a discussion. And I promise I'll get you out early to pay for last week. Essentially, though, we have the spirit comes back with what we would consider an Aristotelian, Platonic. We would consider it actually a Platonic view of the world, in that, for instance, a physical chair, the concept of an idea is eternal, right? So, for instance, you might have the idea, you might have a physical chair, and okay, awesome, I'm sitting in a physical chair. I know very well that this particular chair that I'm sitting in, it only has so long until it's just a memory. But those ideas, the idea of a chair is eternal. The idea of a chair is stronger than the actual physical side of a chair. And that's basically the argument, one of the main arguments that the spirit makes here. So I'll let you read that. Of course, I assume you already read it. But essentially we see this conflict between the flesh and the spirit. And of course, if you're familiar with a lot of Christian theology, you're familiar with the concept that we are as human beings. We're constantly being there's this kind of struggle between our spiritual side and our physical side. So that's a lot of the imagery that she is calling upon. So these are our three authors, and those were our three readings. I just wanted to just kind of touch base with these things. Again, as we continue to read, now, what we're getting into next week is going to be more or less kind of the beginning of what we might consider the American philosophy, the philosophies that really started a lot of the literature that boomed out of the United States as it became a country. A lot of this stuff that we're reading now, of course, everything so far is before we have the United States. We have just colonies, and we have a lot of different types of people coming to this new world, trying to make it, trying to live a life. And so it's kind of a lot of things in different directions, but primarily when it comes to our colonists, we have some people looking for money, some people looking for basically like a new life where they can have religious freedom. So there's those things. Let's see here real quick. Let's take a look at what we're going to be reading next week. Looks like everybody had a chance to do their short writing or video. Anybody doing videos? No? Maybe you could be a YouTube star. All right, here we go. So let's go ahead and I'll share my screen with you. All right. So what we have here is we're going to be on week 3, and now we're getting into what we consider maybe the federal period, maybe not. We're really getting into the age of enlightenment. So enlightenment values, enlightenment thinking, the ideas behind rationalism. So it's a whole new way of thinking that is sweeping Europe at this time, and we are still living in the world that was started during the Age of Enlightenment. So in week 3, all you have to do is read 2 authors, and there's the 2 authors. So it's going to be Ben Franklin and Thomas Paine, 2 very different individuals that you're going to be reading. And so what I'd like you to do is read those real quick. Let me see if I have any videos that I want you to watch. Oh, looks like I got a lot of videos I'd like you to watch. So, okay, the reason why I was pretty sure I had some videos that you needed to watch was because you need to be familiar with this philosophy. Okay, so this is a philosophy that is it is just kind of erupting over in Europe at the time. Let's see here, which is rationalism. Or what we might consider the Age of Enlightenment. So definitely take a look at these videos, learn about natural law. This will open up a whole new way of looking at the founding fathers of the United States. So it's going to open up a whole new way of looking at really all of the things that came after it. So the first week I had you guys watch all those videos in the week 1 folder. There was quite a bit of videos to watch. The reason for that is I wanted you to see essentially the progression of philosophy over time. There was a time whenever in Europe, it's strange, but after the Roman Empire fell in the West, for generations after that, people were trying to figure out how to create a better society, how to claim a new Rome, how to make a society that would stand up like Rome did in the West for 1,000 years. What is the key to the right society? And for many of those generations, they look back on the days of Rome as these days whenever technology was better. and everything was better. And it's interesting because, of course, in the world we live in now, it's hard for us to kind of relate to that, to think that there was a time in the past that was more technologically advanced or more advanced socially or politically or in any way. For us, it's we don't think like that in the current, in the age that we live in. However, for an enormous amount of time after the fall of Rome, people were really like, man, it was awesome back in the old days. I wish I lived back in the old days when the technology was better, whenever there was more access to medicine, whenever the civil society worked better. And so we had what we call the Renaissance, or the reawakening, and that brought forth empiricism, rationalism, the scientific method. So we're getting all of those things exploding at the same time as the new world is being colonized. So a lot of interesting aspects of history are happening at the same time. And what we're going to see is how these things are affecting the way people are thinking and the way what people are writing about, what essentially the ideas and the literature that come out of it. But always remember, the literature of the time, it should be looked at through the lens of the context of the time. So I want you to read, so Ben Franklin and Thomas Paine. These two authors are going to give you a good insight as far as some of the thinking of this time. Of course, I want you to take a look at those videos so you have a pretty good idea of the philosophy of the time. I'm going to go ahead and turn the recording off. And hey, if you have anything to say, I won't record you saying it. If you have any questions or comments about any of the readings, I just wanted to kind of briefly cover them, just for the class, this class's sake. So we're going to do some discussion, and I'm just going to stop recording here.